Hamilton International Airport, one of the busiest aviation hubs on the east coast of the United States, was in the midst of Saturday morning rush hour. Streams of people moved briskly through boarding gates, check-in counters, and security zones, each traveler carrying their own destination, concerns, and invisible biases. At Gate B27, a well-dressed group chatted animatedly near the business class lounge. They were the family of Brielle Aldridge, a well-known social media influencer, on their way to Milan for her extravagant wedding to Jared Coleman, a young, handsome, and remarkably humble African-American pilot. In the midst of the group, no one noticed the 76-year-old woman stepping down from the special passenger transport cart. Karen Carter, with neatly combed silver hair and warm brown eyes that still held a quiet power. She wore a simple navy blue coat and carried an old leather suitcase, but her face radiated calm confidence. She had just flown in from New Orleans, responding to a last-minute invitation from her grandson Jared, the boy she had raised since he was 9, after his parents died in a car crash. Karen had barely reached the lounge area when a woman's voice cut through the noise, cold, possessive. "Excuse me, who are you looking for?" asked a middle-aged white woman, stepping in front of Karen with a skeptical gaze. It was Candace Aldridge, Brielle's mother. Her eyes scanned Karen from head to toe, dissecting every wrinkle, every worn stitch on that old handbag. "I'm Karen Carter, Jared's grandmother. He invited me to join him on this flight." Candace furrowed her brow and gave a tight, polite but disdainful smile. "Oh, Jared didn't mention you, and I believe this area is for business class passengers only." Even though Karen held a printed ticket in her hand, she was asked to wait for verification, something no one else in the white entourage had to endure. No apology, no offer of a seat. Just Candace's scrutinizing eyes and whispers from Brielle's relatives behind her. "I thought she was someone important. Turns out she looks like she just got off a Greyhound bus. Isn't she Jared's old housekeeper or something?" Karen heard every word. But she didn't flinch. She stood there in silence, her gaze drifting toward the runway where planes were lining up for takeoff. She had lived through the Jim Crow era, seen signs that read "whites only," and had swallowed tears when she was denied service at diners. A few snide comments in airport lounge meant nothing to her. But for Jared, her grandson, the boy she loved as her own, that was different. Karen knew. Her silence today would become a lesson those people would never forget. The airport announcements echoed rhythmically across the terminal. But at Gate B27, everything felt frozen under the weight of tension. Mrs. Karen Carter still stood there, her grip firm on her boarding pass and business class ticket, booked by her grandson himself. The light from the large terminal windows lit up her silver hair, making her stand out even more amidst a crowd dressed in glamour, yet lacking in substance. Jared Coleman, dressed in the crisp civilian pilot uniform of WestJet Air, walked briskly toward the gate. He had just completed a flight from San Diego and hurried over to greet his grandmother before their private flight to Milan. But the first thing he saw wasn't his grandmother sitting comfortably in the lounge. It was her standing alone near the check-in counter, being stopped by a ground staff member he had clearly noted. "Assist my grandmother from the special passenger transport." Jared's expression darkened. He quickened his pace, and in just a few seconds he caught the uneasy look on Candace Aldridge's face, Brielle's mother, and the way several members of her family averted their eyes. "Grandma?" Jared called out, his voice slightly hoarse from the long flight, but steady and clear. Karen turned around, her eyes softening. Jared opened his arms and embraced her without hesitation, regardless of the stares around them. "I'm so sorry. I should have met you right at the gate." She smiled gently, patting his back. "It's all right, sweetheart. I'm used to waiting." Jared turned to Candace, his polite smile gone. "I arranged special assistance for my grandmother. Why was she left standing out here?" Candace shrugged, her voice still calm but laced with defensiveness. "Oh, Jared, we weren't sure if she was family. She didn't quite look like—" "Didn't look like what?" Jared interrupted, his tone dropping. "Didn't look refined enough to be with your family? Or didn't look like the woman who raised a boy who lost his parents at 9 and got him all the way through college?" The entire Aldridge family fell silent. An older woman muttered, "We didn't know." Jared didn't need to know anymore. He had seen enough. You all treated my grandmother like a stranger, when she's the reason I exist, the reason I'm standing here today as a pilot, and the reason I even know how to love someone, including your daughter. Brielle, who had been at the lounge bar with friends, now appeared, cocktail in hand. She caught the last part of Jared's words, her face flushing with embarrassment. She walked over and gently tugged at Jared's sleeve. "Babe, please don't make this a big deal." Jared turned toward his fiancée, locking eyes with her. "Did you know this was happening?" "I just heard bits and pieces. My mom said there was an unfamiliar woman who didn't have proper ID." Karen spoke then, her voice calm but resonating like a bronze bell. "She didn't recognize me, didn't want to. And the ID." She held up her business class boarding pass, her name Karen Carter printed in bold. "This was booked by Jared 3 weeks ago." No one responded. Candace subtly turned her head, but the guilt was clear in her eyes. Jared took out his phone. He opened the email with the flight booking and showed the screen. Karen Carter's business class confirmation, with an added note. "Passenger requires special assistance. Please meet at arrival gate." I did everything to ensure my grandmother would be treated with respect, but apparently this ticket wasn't enough because of her skin color. Brielle stepped back, and for the first time that morning, Candace had nothing to say. The air went still. Then a deep male voice spoke from behind. "Excuse me, is this Mrs. Karen Carter?" A white man in his 50s, wearing a simple suit and a Hamilton Airport executive badge, stepped forward. His name tag read, "Mr. Harding, the Director of VIP Guest Services at Hamilton International. I've been a fan of yours for years. I heard your keynote at UCLA in 1989. It's an honor to finally meet you." The silence broke, and the mood shifted. Brielle's mouth fell open. Jared raised an eyebrow. Mr. Harding turned to Jared. "We're preparing a private suite in our VIP lounge. Mrs. Carter more than qualifies. She exceeds every benchmark. Please accept our deepest apologies for what just happened." Brielle blinked in disbelief. "Wait, what keynote? What is he talking about?" Mr. Harding smiled. "Oh, I assumed everyone knew. Mrs. Carter was one of the first black women ever appointed to the Federal Economic Advisory Board, founder of Women Forward, and a Presidential Medal of Freedom nominee in 1996. The Aldridge family was stunned into silence. Karen raised an eyebrow. "I don't like flaunting the past, but it seems today it's necessary." Jared looked around at everyone. And for the first time that morning, he smiled. "Well, I guess now we know who the real VIP is." Brielle stood frozen in the airport corridor, like a statue caught in a storm. Around her, the world moved on. People wheeling suitcases, answering phones, calling out to each other at boarding counters. But inside her, time had stopped. Karen Carter. The name just spoken with such reverence by an airport executive belonged to the very woman she, just minutes ago, had assumed was probably a lost passenger, or at the wrong gate. She couldn't even recall a time when she'd seen her mother, Candace, blush the way she did now. The sharp-tongued woman who'd never lost an argument at a social gala or charity auction now stood in silence before an elderly woman in a simple blue dress. "I didn't know Jared," Brielle spoke, as if those words might redeem her. "My mom didn't tell me anything." "You didn't need your mother to tell you. You saw it, you heard what they said, and you stayed quiet." Jared didn't yell. He didn't raise his voice. But the disappointment in his eyes cut like a blade. "You were the first to know she was coming. And when you saw her left out, you chose to look away." Brielle clenched her fists. "You think I did that on purpose?" "I don't know." Jared shook his head. "All I know is that the person I love most in this world, the person I owe everything to, was humiliated in public on what was supposed to be our special day." Candace suddenly interjected, as though she could no longer bear the silence. "This is getting out of hand. We're at an airport, not a human rights tribunal." Mr. Harding, the executive, stepped forward, his tone still composed. "Mrs. Aldridge, I'm sorry to say this, but this is an international airport with a zero-tolerance policy on discrimination, and what occurred here today with multiple witnesses is more than grounds for—" Karen raised a hand to stop him. Her gaze was as gentle as silk, but no less firm. "I didn't come here to shame anyone. I just wanted to witness my grandson boarding this flight with his fiancée, with love and respect, like any ordinary person." Brielle couldn't hold it anymore. She stepped closer to Karen, eyes welling with tears. "Mrs. Carter, I'm sorry. I really didn't know. Karen looked at the young woman in front of her. Blue eyes, high cheekbones, fair skin. This girl wasn't cruel. She had simply never learned how to stand on the right side when injustice whispered instead of shouted. You know, Brielle, she said softly, discrimination doesn't always come in shouts. Sometimes it hides in silence, right when a voice is most needed. The words landed like a verdict. Not harsh, not bitter, but with the weight of 60 years of lived history. A girl who once dared to sit in the front row of an all-white classroom in Alabama, now the first black woman to head a global investment firm valued at $1.3 billion. Jared took a deep breath. His hands, once clenched, slowly relaxed. I think it's time to take Grandma to the VIP lounge. It's all prepared. Karen nodded. She turned to Brielle once more, this time with a look of forgiveness. Marriage isn't just about two people loving each other. It's about two families choosing to respect one another. If you still want to join this family, start today. Brielle nodded, a tear trailing down her cheek. 30 minutes later, Sapphire Lounge. Karen sat quietly in a plush leather armchair, watching sunlight dance on the runway. Jared was speaking briefly with an airport staffer nearby. Brielle sat a few seats away, silent. The tension had eased, but a thin layer of frost still lingered between the three of them. Karen reached into her bag and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook, the one she always brought on her travels. She flipped to a page, uncapped an old fountain pen, a birthday gift from her late husband in 1982, and began to write. Brielle looked up. What are you writing? Travel journal, Karen replied without looking up. Every time I'm forgotten, I write it down to remind myself that I still exist. Jared returned just in time, a small smile on his face. The flight to Milan is boarding. They've invited us to be the first ones on. Karen rose, gently smoothing her dress. Well, I suppose this 82-year-old woman better hurry, or we'll delay everyone else. Brielle stepped forward, for the first time since this all began, and reached out to take Karen's hand. Would you give me a chance to make this right? Karen looked at her, a long, quiet breath. Then she smiled, genuinely. You already started, the moment you took my hand. As Karen Carter stepped through the jet bridge, her stride remained composed, her gaze calm, as if she were the only person still in control amid a world rushing past. Jared gently guided her into the first-class cabin, where leather seats, soft reading lights, and the hushed silence of those accustomed to privilege awaited. You'll sit here, Jared said, smoothing the back of seat 1A. There's a wool blanket and bottled water waiting. If you need anything, just press the call button. Karen nodded softly, saying nothing. But as Jared turned to leave, she looked after him. The boy she once held in her arms, taught his first words, taught the difference between right and wrong in a world that was rarely fair. Brielle boarded next, still visibly uneasy. She didn't dare sit next to Karen, instead choosing seat 1C across the aisle. Then a familiar voice called out behind them. Carter? Karen Carter, is that you? All three turned around. A man in his 70s, silver-haired but full of life, wearing a navy blazer and holding a leather briefcase, was beaming at Karen. Karen raised an eyebrow, then her eyes lit up. Lord Ellis? Charles Ellis? Who else could it be? He laughed. The woman who once made me vote against my own proposal in the 1987 investment board meeting. Brielle stood stunned. Jared turned to him. I'm Jared, her grandson. Ah, so you're little Jared she always talked about in her speeches. Charles grinned. I've said it before, if America had more grandmothers like Karen, Wall Street would never have spiraled into a crisis of trust. He took the seat at 1B, right between Karen and Brielle. A flight attendant quickly arrived with a glass of champagne. No alcohol, Charles waved her off. Bring me black tea, the kind Mrs. Carter prefers. Karen smiled. Some relationships don't need daily upkeep. They simply show up when they're needed most. Once the plane reached cruising altitude, the overhead lights dimmed and the engine's hum became a steady background lull. Karen pulled a worn photo from her bag, one taken in 1981, showing her standing in front of the United Trust building, holding the first leather handbag she ever bought with her own earnings. You know, she said, back then, just riding the elevator to the same floor as the white male executives felt like a victory. Charles nodded. And I remember the day you spoke at Harvard Business School. A room full of white students sat through 90 minutes without interrupting, not out of politeness, but because they were too afraid of being crushed by your data. Brielle sat silently, her gaze flickering between awe and shame. She had once believed herself to be smart, an honors student at Columbia invited to speak at student summits about social justice. Yet, when prejudice unfolded before her eyes, she had stayed silent. Jared gently tapped her shoulder. "See, Grandma doesn't need anyone to defend her. But respect should never be optional." "I know," Brielle whispered. "I just don't know how I've studied all these years and still froze when it mattered most." Karen turned toward the young woman. "You know, growth often begins when we find the courage to admit we were wrong." "I don't even know where to start." "With something small," Karen replied. "An apology, a corrective action, and the right kind of silence, the kind where you listen instead of reacting." Charles leaned forward. "Karen, if I invited you to be the keynote speaker at next month's Global Aviation Forum, would you accept?" Karen raised her eyebrows. "I don't run anything anymore. I'm just an old woman traveling on airline miles and blogging about old books." "Exactly why they need you," Charles said seriously. "A real person with real stories, not CEOs who speak like robots. They need to hear about failure, about being shut out of boardrooms because you were a black woman. They need what only you can tell." Jared looked at her and said, "You once told me that standing up takes courage, but I think it takes something else too." "What's that?" "Patience. To tell your story for the 1,000th time because someone out there is hearing it for the first." Karen fell silent. She gently squeezed the old photo, then lifted her eyes. "All right, I'll speak, but on one condition. Anything. Don't introduce me as an inspiration. Introduce me as the woman once deemed not worth listening to." The plane touched down at Malpensa International Airport at 7:42 a.m., right on schedule, as promised by the luxury airline's SkySail premiere. Spring sunlight poured through the first-class cabin windows, casting a warm glow on Karen Carter's serene face, as if the morning itself had come to welcome her. Karen buttoned up her navy blue coat, her hands slightly trembling, but her eyes still sharp. Jared stood and gently helped her retrieve her carry-on from the overhead bin. Brielle stepped out ahead, still deep in thought about the conversation from the night before. A night when she saw not just her fiancé's grandmother, but a reflection of herself she hadn't realized was missing. Someone who needed to relearn how to stand up for truth. In the International Arrivals VIP lounge, a line of staff in silver uniforms stood respectfully. Charles Ellis walked beside Karen, explaining, "This year's forum theme is legacy, not leverage. And you're the opening keynote. I didn't tell you earlier, wanted to keep it a surprise." Karen gave him a half-annoyed, half-amused glance. "Still playing games, are you, Charles? I'm not the only one. There's someone special waiting for you." At that moment, a woman stepped out from the VIP suite. Short hair, light gray suit, and eyes full of purpose. She wasn't a celebrity, but her walk turned heads. In her hand was a small item, a folded letter, its paper aged. "Do you remember a letter sent to your mentoring program in 1996? The woman asked. Karen squinted, then exhaled. "Skylar Jensen." "That's me," she smiled. "You returned my letter with a handwritten note. One day, turn your question into someone else's answer." Karen stood still. That letter, she'd kept it for over 20 years before sending it back to the 17-year-old girl who'd written it. A young black girl from a low-income neighborhood in Chicago, asking, "Is there a place in this world for those not born into privilege?" "Today," Skylar said, "I'm the executive director of the Global Foundation for Community Education. And it was you who first made me believe that no one is out of place if they believe they belong." Press room, Global Forum. The top-floor glass conference room on the 32nd level overlooked the city of Milan. Attendees from over 20 countries had gathered. Leaders in finance, policy, tech, aviation, and education. Jared stood off stage watching Karen walk to the podium. A technician reached to adjust her mic, but Karen gently removed it. "I want to talk," she said, "not give a presentation." Karen looked straight at the audience. No LED screens, no sound effects. Just her voice, slightly raspy, weathered by time, but every word etched into the air. "I was once denied entry to a leadership conference in 1979 for lacking experience. even though I was the only person in the room who had run an entire freight rail line. I've been asked to step aside by security in buildings where I was a shareholder. And once, after being invited to chair an advisory board, I stood in a lobby for 15 minutes because the receptionist couldn't believe I was important. The room was silent. I don't share this for sympathy. I share it to remind us, the world doesn't change because we complain. It changes when we step in, uninvited, and leave footprints behind. The deepest moment. Karen reached into her pocket and pulled out an old handkerchief, lace-trimmed, embroidered with a single line, "Still I rise, Maya Angelou." She said, "I cried into this handkerchief in the bathroom of O'Hare Airport after being denied a first-class seat I had paid for because I didn't look the part. I kept it to remind myself, every humiliation is a receipt for doing something right." Then she looked up, sweeping her gaze across the room. If you hold power today, don't let it blind you to those without tailored suits. And if you've ever been dismissed, remember this. As long as you're still standing, you are living proof that another world is being born. The entire room rose. No cue, no signal. They just stood. Because in that moment they felt small before a woman who didn't need a microphone to silence every heart. Backstage, Jared wept. Brielle gripped his hand. "I've been silent for too long." "So what will you say today?" he asked. She looked toward the stage and whispered, "That I'm proud, that no one is just a grandma. They are living history." After her speech, Karen Carter stepped quietly off the stage. No fanfare, no grand exit, but she didn't go far. In the backstage room, dozens of eyes turned toward her, as if they had just witnessed a living miracle. Skylar entered first, her face glowing. "You didn't say what they expected. You said what they needed to hear." Karen smiled. "Sometimes, honesty is the most respectful gift you can offer." Another person stepped forward, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair, wearing a three-piece suit. He extended a business card. "Elliot Voss, CEO, International Aviation Policy Alliance." "Miss Carter, I'll be direct. What you just did wasn't a speech. It was a model of transformation." "I just told a story," Karen replied gently. "Exactly. And that's what the aviation industry needs, humanity, not just systems." He pulled up a chair and sat across from her, his demeanor candid and unfiltered. "We're forming an independent ethics council, a watchdog over discrimination, human rights, and transparency across global aviation. 22 airlines, 17 international airports, and 6 aircraft manufacturers are on board. But we need a chairperson both the policy world and the public trust." Karen sat upright. Her face remained calm, but her eyes flashed with guarded awareness. "What are you asking, Mr. Voss?" "I'm inviting you to serve as the chair of the International Council on Aviation Equity." The air in the room seemed to tear open with the weight of the impossible. Skylar's mouth fell open. Jared, standing near the wall, almost dropped his glass of water. Karen paused for a long moment. She'd received countless awards, keynote invitations, advisory roles, inspirational honors, but this was different. This was real power. A title with responsibility, not applause. "Why me?" she asked. Elliot Voss didn't flinch. "Because no one can dismiss you. You're not owned by corporate interests. You owe no one favors. And most importantly, you know what it feels like to be pushed away from a seat you legally paid for." Karen closed her eyes for a second. "I'm 72, Mr. Voss. I've given a lifetime already. And now you get to decide who sits where, not by skin color, not by bank balance, but by integrity and justice." That evening, in a riverside hotel room overlooking the Navigli Canal, Karen sat in a wicker chair across from the wide-open window. A spring breeze floated in, carrying the scent of jasmine, toasted bread, and street guitars. Brielle sat beside her, silent, just watching. "Do you think you'll accept?" she asked. Karen looked out the window, then answered softly. "When my grandmother was alive, she told me, forgiveness may heal wounds, but justice prevents new ones." "And if you were your grandmother?" Brielle tilted her head. Karen didn't answer right away. She stood, walked to the small desk where her laptop sat, and opened it. On the screen was the official invitation from the International Aviation Alliance. At the bottom, a single line read, "Let history be written by those the world tried to forget." The next day, at Milan International Airport, at the very gate where Karen had once been denied boarding 15 years ago for not looking like a business-class passenger, she now stood again. but this time as the newly appointed chairwoman. Media outlets swarmed. A journalist from Le Monde asked, "Miss Carter, where will you begin in a system so entrenched in bias, injustice, and politics?" Karen looked straight into the lens. "I will begin right here, with the questions no one wants to answer, in the corridors where people are silenced, and in the seats where some have always believed others don't belong." She paused, then smiled. "I'm not here to clean up the system. I'm here to redesign it." 3 weeks later, inside a 48-story glass tower in the heart of Geneva, Karen Carter stepped into the boardroom of the Global Aviation Executive Council, a gathering of the most powerful decision-makers in the industry. Airline CEOs, airport directors, government advisors, and leaders of international associations. There were 27 seats in the room, but every eye seemed drawn to one person: the turquoise blazer, the low-heeled shoes, and the composed presence, Karen. A staffer approached and whispered, "Someone would like to speak with you before the session. You know him." Karen looked toward the glass doors. A silver-haired man in a smoky gray suit stood waiting, his air of confidence all too familiar. His name was Gregory Mathers, CEO of Atlantic One Airways, and also the man who 15 years ago signed off on the anti-fraud boarding policy, the very reason Karen had once been denied boarding on her business-class flight from Milan to New York. "Madam Carter," Gregory began, his polite smile never reaching his eyes. "Gregory," Karen replied calmly, as if there were nothing between them but history. "I hear Atlantic One was the first airline to oppose the Passenger Equity Index initiative." "We're not against transparency," he shrugged. "We're against reducing complex dynamics to a scorecard of prejudice." Karen tilted her head. "Or perhaps you're against customers finally seeing how unfairly they're treated." The air froze for a beat. "I came only to advise you. Don't begin your term by dividing this industry." "I'm not here to divide," Karen replied, eyes fixed on his. "I'm here to clarify." Gregory smirked. "Careful, Mrs. Carter. Idealists don't last long in this system." Karen gave a small knowing smile. "Then maybe it's time the system changed." Inside the council meeting, Karen presented the first reform under her leadership, a program named Horizon, built on 3 pillars. Passenger Equity Index. Each airline must publicly disclose data related to discriminatory behavior, ranging from flight attendant conduct to complaint rates involving bias based on race, gender, religion, or appearance. Body camera for bias. At 50 pilot airports, security and boarding staff will wear body cameras to objectively document interactions and ensure accountability for misconduct. Right to review. Every passenger denied boarding, downgraded, or removed from a flight has the right to request an audio or video explanation and submit it to an independent oversight body. A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. Some executives nodded in support. Others, like Gregory, frowned. A legal director from a European airline objected. "This so-called Passenger Equity Index is just a prejudice scorecard. It tarnishes our brand over a few bad apples." Karen didn't flinch. "When you resist data, you protect a culture of silence, and that silence is what breeds discrimination." A Canadian airport representative hesitated. "If we disclose this data, passengers may lose trust." Karen raised her chin. "Passengers don't lose trust when they hear the truth. They lose trust when you refuse to face it." That same night, a leaked draft of the Horizon proposal hit the media. Some right-leaning outlets labeled it a victimhood ploy, turning aviation into a courtroom. On social media, hashtags like "Too Woke to Fly" and "Karen Takes the Sky" began to trend. But then, a powerful op-ed surfaced, written by Marcus Richardson, the Black former CEO ejected from first class on a Skylux flight in 2022, now head of the Aviation Justice Initiative. Karen Carter didn't come to divide the skies. She came to clear the clouds of prejudice that have obscured trust in the world's most vital form of transportation. The article was shared over 4 million times in 24 hours. In her modest Geneva apartment, Karen sat by the window, streetlights casting a soft glow across her face. Brielle FaceTimed from Atlanta. "Grandma, I'm worried about you. Not because of the politics, because I know you once promised yourself never to go back to that past." Karen said nothing. 15 years ago, you walked away from that boarding gate in tears. Now you've returned, not for revenge, but to rebuild. But, tell me honestly, who wants to rebuild a place that once pushed them out? Karen leaned back in her chair. She whispered, "No one truly belongs to the place that once excluded them, unless they return to make sure no one else is ever excluded again." The entire VIP Terminal 3 seemed to freeze in time as Karen Carter stepped out of the private suite, gently holding the wrist of Maxwell Ellington, chairman of Hudson Aeronautics Group. Olivia Stanford, who only minutes earlier had pointed her finger arrogantly at Karen's face, now stood completely still, as if all the strength had drained from her body. The group of staff who had once sneered, once raised their eyebrows at her simple dress, now fell silent, their hearts pounding in their chests. No one dared to speak. No one dared to laugh. Maxwell stepped forward, his voice rising clearly in the elegant, weighty air of the terminal. "Let me be clear. For everyone to hear, this is Mrs. Karen Carter, one of Hudson Aeronautics' earliest strategic investors and co-founder of the SkyPath Equality Initiative, the very framework this terminal is built upon." Then he turned to Karen and gave her a respectful nod. "And to me, she is a mentor, a friend, and the reason I didn't abandon this project back in 1999. Karen offered only a soft smile. Her expression was as calm as still water, but her shoulders stood straighter than before. The humility in her presence remained, but now no one could deny she was the true center of this place. Olivia looked as if she'd been struck by lightning, the kind that doesn't burn but reveals the truth. She turned to her mother, Celeste Stanford, but was met only with a blank stare. Both women, along with Olivia's husband Richard, stood lost, unprepared for a moment they couldn't control. Karen turned her gaze toward Olivia, not with anger, not with triumph. Only with what she never lacked: dignity. "Miss Olivia," Karen began, her voice warm but unwavering, "instead of blaming others for your inconvenience, you might learn to ask questions before jumping to conclusions. At my age, people don't come to airports to cause trouble. I came for something simple, to witness a change I helped build come to life." The air thickened. A few onlookers, passengers who had seen it all unfold, now nodded silently. A middle-aged woman whispered to her husband, "She's not even angry, and yet she just taught everyone here a lesson, with nothing but grace." At that moment, a black security officer in uniform stepped forward. His name was Marcus Bell, the International Terminal's security manager. "Mrs. Carter, I offer my deepest apologies for what happened. Our entire security team has been briefed. Would you like me to escort you to the private lounge?" Karen shook her head. "No need, Marcus. I just want to sit here a little longer. This is the first time I've felt a silence this powerful in a place that used to be too loud for anyone to hear themselves think." Marcus placed a respectful hand over his chest and stepped back. But no one left. All eyes remained on her, quietly watching. Then a young receptionist named Leo, the one who had turned his face away when Karen first walked in, approached, his voice shaky. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. Earlier, I judged you because—" Karen gently placed her hand on his arm. "Because you only saw the surface, not the journey." Then she smiled softly. "It's all right, as long as after today, you learn to look closer at the quiet ones who are always watching." Even Teresa Whitmore, the CEO of Hamilton Airport, appeared after hearing from Maxwell. A powerful white executive, she had once opposed the very equity initiative Karen and Maxwell launched. But the overwhelming public support and the transformation she'd witnessed had changed her stance. Teresa stepped forward and bowed slightly before Karen, in front of her staff and the VIP guests. "I owe you an apology and a thank you. What you planted here is finally blooming, and we were late to see it." Karen nodded. "What matters is not who saw it first, but who's willing to see it when it finally appears." Finally, as Michael, her grandson, returned with his fiancée Alana, they walked straight to Karen. Alana took Karen's hand. "We heard everything. You're the woman who made an entire system take a hard look at itself." Karen squeezed her hand gently, then turned to Michael. "I once told you, people may forget what you wore or where you went to school, but they'll remember how you made them feel. So tell me, what did you learn today?" Michael answered without hesitation. "That silence in the face of injustice is injustice too." Karen smiled, not with pride, but with a quiet light of legacy passed on. Final scene of this arc, Karen slowly rises to her feet. The golden light of the sunset streams through the tall windows of the first-class lounge, casting a warm glow on her silver hair. She stands, Not tall in stature, not loud in words, but undeniably unignorable. Across Terminal 3, staff, VIPs, executives, and guests watch her. No one says a word. Because some people, simply by showing up, make the entire system reconsider itself. As the late evening sun cast its fading glow over the international terminal, Karen Carter slowly stepped away from the VIP lounge, where she had just concluded a quiet conversation with the airline's media representatives. No angry declarations, no fiery rebuttals, just a smile, a gentle word, and the entire system bowed in silence. The Hunter family, who had once walked proudly through security, now quietly retreated, heads lowered in shame. They had learned a hard, lasting lesson. You never know who's sitting next to you at the airport. The woman you ignore, dismiss, or judge may be someone the entire industry reveres. Jason stood beside Karen, eyes glowing with pride as he looked at his grandmother, a woman who had walked through generations of prejudice, injustice, and pain, now standing as a symbol of resilience, humility, and quiet strength. "You didn't need to say much," Jason whispered. "You've given them a moment they'll never forget." Karen gazed out the tall terminal windows, where planes soared into the sky carrying thousands of stories. She smiled, her eyes deep and steady like the midnight sea. "Jason," she said softly, "in the end, class isn't about a first-class ticket. It's about how we treat people when we don't know who they are. If you believe respect shouldn't be reserved for status, skin color, or the clothes someone wears in an airport. If you believe in the quiet power of people like Karen, those who don't need to prove themselves, but still make the world pause and reflect. Subscribe, hit the bell, and share this story with someone who needs to be reminded. Never judge a person by the first glance." Aiva Stories, where silent moments become the voice that reshapes an entire system.